Hey everybody, Alex Newman here with the New American. I am here today with Charles Moscowitz. He is a friend, a radio host, an amazing all-around person, and he just released a new book. And when I saw the email, I thought, oh man, we have got to get him on to talk about this. It's called, amazingly, God is God. And that would have been a relatively uncontroversial statement a few years ago. Today, who knows? Charles, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Alex. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, so your book is, it's wide ranging. It talks about a lot of different things. One of the things that you say is that believing in God doesn't contradict science. That sounds very unprogressive and very unenlightened. Could you expand a little bit on that, Charles?
Well, because God is God and science is the study of God's universe. There, in a way, it's two different topics. It's like apples and oranges, but both are valid. And the study of nature, it does not in any way preclude the fact that it was created by God. In fact, if you take God out of the equation, then you just simply have materialism, which is that everything is perpetual, everything is in existence as a physical item, and that there is no spiritual side. And yet it's obvious that there is a spiritual side to existence. Anyone who is willing to admit to themselves that this is the case knows this. When you wake up in the morning and you open your eyes, you experience the fact that you're alive. The idea that man is created in the image of God has to do with the fact that we share a one particular attribute with God, and that makes us different than all other beings in the universe, and that is consciousness, our ability to reason, our ability to know who we are and what the world is, our ability to name that, our ability to understand nature and to understand science. So, in a sense, the very idea of understanding science is predicated upon the existence of a creator of the universe who is separated from science and who is outside of human manipulation, but who is an objective source of all of existence and who is the source of all of the order of the universe.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I agree with you 100%, Charles. And another one of the claims you look at in your book is this idea of a war on God. And I've been making this case for quite a while that there are quite literally people who hate God and who just despise everything He created, the way He ordered society. Elaborate a little bit on this claim and your view on it. Is there really a war against God, and does that mean also a war against humanity itself?
There has been and there remains a war against God, and it is also a war against human nature. It's a war against man. It's a war against freedom. It's a conspiracy by any sense. And I point out that this conspiracy, if you will, and it is a conspiracy because it was engaged in by two or more people, in this case, Adam and Eve, was an attempt to overthrow God when Eve was tempted by the serpent, which represents Satan, to partake of the tree of knowledge and to know all things, to know all good and evil, to become God, basically. And when Eve took the fruit and then brought Adam into it, which is when it became a conspiracy, they sought to know everything and to overthrow God in heaven. And thus they were banished from the Garden of Eden, and thus began man's dual nature. We are not perfect beings, and that we are prone to sin, and that we need to know God all the more to the degree that we can in order to regulate that sin and to know what is right and wrong. And we can know what's right and wrong by knowing God. We can, and yet, since Adam and Eve, there has been a conspiracy in every generation right up till today. And you and I have talked about some of that going on now, where you have a group of people who seek to overthrow God and replace God with themselves as the center of the universe, as the enlightened ones.
Hmm.
They tend to do that through either outright war in the open, or more likely through subversion of the order that God created. The by subverting that which is, by subverting the moral and ethical code that became clearer with the various covenants that it would emerge in time, starting with the Noahide covenant and then with the covenant of Sinai, and I would argue with the covenant with Jesus, and on, by which God revealed his mission and his identity to man so that we can order our lives accordingly, and that we confront this conspiracy in every generation. The answer to the conspiracy is to expose it and to identify it and to counter it with a godlike understanding. But we should also know that given the fallen nature of man, we will never completely eradicate it. That's not possible. That can only happen at the end of time.
Yeah, no, that's so fascinating, Charles. And there's a lot of I call them evangelifish leaders, and they say, "Oh, no conspiracy theories. Come on, that's just silly stuff." And then I open my Bible, and my Bible says in the book of Psalms, in chapter 2, verse 2, that the kings of the earth were conspiring together against the Lord. I'm like, wait a minute. My Bible says the kings of the earth were conspiring, and here you guys are telling me that there's no conspiring. What do you mean? The Bible talks about conspiracy over and over and over again. It's so interesting that you say that. Now, Charles, you have, I think, a different take than a lot of other people who've looked at some of these questions. And you are Jewish. You describe yourself actually as a secular American Jew. And so you've looked at this kind of controversy down through the ages, down through the centuries between Judaism and Christianity. Um, what do you make of the controversy? Where is it going? Is it still around? I know the recent popes have tried to have much better relationship with Judaism than maybe previous popes have had. And then how does America fit into all that? I know you say that America is a Christian nation, that Jesus is part of America. So elaborate a little bit on those controversies and how that all relates to the United States.
Well, I mean, there is areas of agreement, and there are areas where where there will be no agreement, where there will be no reconciliation. And I think the area of agreement is that we all believe in God, and that
Hmm.
we all seek to understand the moral and ethical code of Sinai, which was completely embraced by Jesus himself, who was a devout Jew, I'd point out, and who said that not a single jot or tittle of the covenant would be in any way compromised. He came to for Christians fulfill the covenant. I think for Jews he came to promote the covenant in the same way that the prophets did. So we may not agree on that, but we do agree on the fact that the Mosaic Covenant is forever, and that the Mosaic Covenant and all of its moral and ethical code is something that we ought to understand as a way not to only order our own lives, but to make sure that we order the lives of our public sphere, our societies, our nations, and but yet it was the ministry of Jesus more than any other that expanded the covenant and the moral and ethical code to the world, which is why I think that Jesus was at least messianic. I don't mean that in the Christian context, but more in the Jewish context, in that he advanced belief in God to such a degree that really unlike any other man ever in history, which is why Jesus was the most important individual in history, if not the Messiah. And that it was because of the ministry of Jesus and the relationship with God, the understanding that we were created not as gods, but in the image of God, that it is out of that idea that the United States was born. It was in the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson said that all men are created equal. He got that from the book of Genesis, where it says that God created man and women in his image, that every human life is a universe. Every human life is equally precious unto God. We're born equal, we die equal. But once we're on the earth, then we have free will, we have circumstance, we have ability to craft our lives, to get ahead, and that in a moral society, we are charged with respecting each other as images of God. And when we violate that respect, then we have civic society that we establish to remedy that problem and to retain that order whenever possible.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Charles. And we hear a lot about the Judeo-Christian foundations of America, and I guess that's really often seen as kind of a reference to Moses and the Ten Commandments. And we even have Moses up on the Supreme Court building. There's Moses, the lawgiver, right there at kind of the pinnacle of the triangle there. What should be the role of, say, the Mosaic Law in a modern society like America? I mean, the progressives want to eliminate all of it, right? No Ten Commandments, no Bible. In fact, all these rules, you're oppressing me. How dare you say that you shouldn't kill, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't lie? What is the appropriate way to implement this in our society while respecting also religious freedom and the diversity of faiths and peoples that make up the United States?
We should recognize the philosophical foundation of the United States is the Mosaic Covenant, which is the Word of God, something that both Jews and Christians agree to, that exists as a set of moral and ethical laws that stand outside of human nature, outside of human ability to manipulate, I should say, and that we should proof check them with the fact that they exist in nature, that they work. I mean, part of our quest as human beings is to further refine those laws and understand them more clearly. Now, there's a difference between understanding the moral and ethical code of Sinai and particular denominational faiths where we do differ, and there's no, we ought to differ. We're not going to be one religion in the world any more than we're going to be one nation in the world. You
Mm,
know, we have different approaches to understanding God, and I think that we should recognize that those religions, and in this case, I would point to Judaism and Christianity, and even to a certain extent, Islam and other religions, to maybe to a lesser extent, but yet to a degree, recognize the moral and ethical code of Sinai because it's true. We recognize the existence of God because God is true. It doesn't contradict our understanding of nature. Now, if you don't want to believe in God, that's fine. That's your business. You can believe in whatever you want. I would suggest, however, that every human being believes in God, whether they admit it or not. Every living being, right down to the amoeba, believes in God, whether they admit it or not. And the reason they do is because God is true. God is self evident, as Thomas Jefferson noted.
yeah, and that reminds me of a verse from the New Testament too. In Romans 1, it says that God has made Himself plain for everybody to see. I mean, you can't look around at the world and say there's no God. Nobody created this, and yet some people deliberately suppress the truth in their unrighteousness because they want to go out and do whatever they feel like it and think that there's not going to be any consequences. And so, Charles, where do we get this book? And my last question to you is, why did you write it? I mean, what was it that motivated you to write this particular book at this particular time? And where can the viewers go and get a copy? What's the best place for them to go and get a copy?
Amazon.com, you can either get a soft cover or the ebook. And, I wrote this book like I wrote most of my other books, all of my other books, which is as a sort of a political and intellectual exercise. There was a bit of a departure for me because usually my books deal with, religion and politics. But I wanted to get a handle on bigger picture, on a bigger picture, on meaning in life, and where we derive that meaning. And I start the book by presenting proof that God exists, and then I go through what that means to us as individuals and as nations. Writing the book was an interesting intellectual exercise, but I will say that after having written the book, and I'm not one who is prone to mystical experience, but nevertheless, this has led me to having a mystical experience, I guess you could say. I mean, a sense of knowing God, and
Wow.
it's not something that I can explain in terms of big bells going off, but it is a greater awareness of myself and my role in the universe with all of my limitations, physically and intellectually, and in terms of my skills, and then a realization that every individual can experience this, no matter who they are, no matter where they are in life, and that if you do experience it, you have a sense of power in terms of seeing truths. You suddenly have a crystallized view of what is true and what isn't true. You have that view almost intrinsically, and I think it is this very experience, and I'm going to elaborate on that as I go on, that is why the enemies of God want to stop that, because they want to be the arbiters of truth. They want to turn your back on who you are, your role in the universe, your purpose, which every individual has. And they want to replace that with a manufactured, materialist, man made purpose that is fuzzy and that has no moral or ethical content. So every individual is sovereign under God. God is the ultimate sovereign. God grants a limited sovereignty to every person. And then we thus then grant a limited ability to protect that sovereignty to nation states. And America is such a state.
Well, it's fascinating, Charles, and personally, I can't wait to get my copy of the book. I was so excited I wanted to interview you first. Maybe we'll have you back to discuss it further. And as always, please keep us posted with what you're working on. Folks, you heard it here. Charles Moscowitz, God is God. You can get it on Amazon.com, either in an ebook or as a soft cover. Charles, thank you once again. Folks, thank you for watching, and God bless you all.